Thank you, Sandhya, and thank you, Kate, for helping us set this up. I also want to thank the team who has put this together, Alan Dunlow, Renee Chartrand, Aaron Olson, Janice Petway, Kari Points, Diana Powers, and Tabitha Randall. We spent probably the better part of 2 months working on this and trying to come up with the best way to present this to you all and really focusing on fiscal management and so forth. So today is session 1, and it's really a general overview. And again, I think this is the beginning of a series of trainings that will focus on fiscal management, both from the ORD perspective and the field perspective. As we go along, we want to start out by trying to get an idea of who the audience is today. We're going to have 2 questions for you, and these are poll questions. So let's go ahead and start the poll.
The poll's been launched. Please make sure to hit the submit button so that we can record your response. Thank you. There's about 10 seconds left.
Okay, so this poll has ended, and I'm looking to see if we have the responses. Sandhya, I don't see the responses. Can you read them out to us?
It's taking a second for it to close.
Okay.
It adds a few additional minutes, so.
Okay. Oh, here we go.
Just about now, yes.
Yep. Good. So it looks like a good portion of the attendees are the either administrative officers or the budget analysts. Great, and that's good. And we had, some of you didn't respond, but that's okay. So it's tailor made for you guys, and so we'll go from there. Going on to the next question. So this question is all about how do you manage your finances? What software do you use? And what we really are interested in is how do you manage your project, your money at the project level, and get information to the investigator. So if you could please respond on which programs or which program you use. You have 1 to choose from.
And I just opened that poll. Be able to submit your response. And the system gives another 20 seconds for any last minute submitters.
All right.
You should be able to see the results now.
Yes, thank you. And so it looks like we've got a large majority of you use Excel with a portion of sites using WinRMS. Some are using QuickBooks, and then others are Vista or FMS. So this is actually important information for us as we start thinking about the future and how we will try to facilitate management of funding for you guys. So why do this now? So this is a long-standing, commitment to the enterprise. Over the years, ORD has allowed stations to really manage research projects on their own, their budgets on their own, and so forth. However, one big word has come up in the last 2 years that have really made us relook at the way things are and the way things work. So the word rescission, which I think a lot of you have heard about, and the appropriation has really impacted the way we do business. And part of the problem is that in order to effectively manage funding at the local level, we need to understand what the impact is on the overall appropriation. So we really need a culture change. We need to understand that we have to spend the money now when you get it, in the year that you get it, and that the 2-year appropriation is really not a 2-year appropriation. It may be for the purposes of Mr. Dunlow and ORD at the national level, but at the local level, we have to think about it as 1-year money and how we can move forward. So how do we go about this? We need to notify investigators that carryover is no longer acceptable. I've been in this since 1990 and, understand the importance of carryover and how it worked and, how we were able to have flexible spending and so forth. However, we really need to start thinking about this as 1-year money. When we have large carryovers and our sites impact the national number and we have $70 million in rescission, think of $70 million and take an average of $200,000 a year for our merit review and gives you a number of how many merit reviews we could have funded with that. So that's just kind of a sidebar to kind of give you the impact. We need to work closely with our investigators. We've been hearing offhand from investigators that research offices aren't communicating with them about PMOs. What does it mean to have a PMO? Can you send money back and get it at the tail end of the project? I think that what you should try to get out of this today is that the services are interested in understanding what the struggles are and what they can do to reallocate money, maybe at the end of the project, maybe in the following year, and so forth. So you'll be hearing more about PMOs. There'll be outreaches from the services to you, meaning that there'll be outreaches from the services to you and then to the PI, and to try to determine solutions. And this has to be done now, because we need to send the money back if we're sending money back before the end of Q3. And that means, and the reason for that is that ORD needs to be able to reallocate or repurpose those funds this year, and also think about the out years and what the impact is. Because if you're going to send back $50,000 this year, that $50,000 might come back next year or the following year. And so, what will that do to impact their budgets at the ORD level? We need to utilize financial software and tools to manage budgets. And, these existing tools are RMS and Excel and so forth, but maybe we can find better ways or better softwares to help you guys out in the field. I've been using RMS since 1994, and it's great. It does have its quirks, and those who use it understand that, but it is a good way to at least manage at the project level the funding. We need to understand the money cycle and who's responsible for what. I think Mr. Dunlow is going to talk about that a little bit more. But I think that we need to know, what does it mean to have an appropriation this year? What does it mean to start a project in Q3 rather than Q1, or start a project mid-year and so forth? And we need to understand that there's accountability going on now. The research offices are going to be held to a higher standard effective this year. You're going to be asked to provide more information to ORD, to the services, so they can see where your expenditure rates are and so forth. Not at the national or at the aggregate level of the medical center, because Mr. Dunlow can see that, but it's actually at the project level. And of course, we need to read the Dunlow notifications or the Dunlow memos carefully, and we need to really adhere to that. If he's talking about reimbursables, then you really need to do the reimbursable process the right way. If he's talking about expenditure transfers to medical care funding, we need to do that as well, because those things are things that always impact your budget. And so if you get reimbursable money and you don't expense transfer it, it still impacts the carryovers and the expenditure rates and so forth. If you get reimbursables from the nonprofit into the X2 account, although those are know-your funds and those are great to have, it does impact the carryover. So, I believe he said that there's, a few $1 million out there in the X2 fund that need to be moved out of the X2 fund. So pay attention to those things and pay attention to those memos so we can kind of move forward. So let's talk a little bit about the money cycle and, what ORD is going to be holding the research offices. They're going to be holding them accountable for execution. Again, we need to work closely with the investigators and the center administrative staff to ensure execution. Centers need to notify research office staff when additional funding is requested or offered by ORD services prior to accepting those funds. Because while you may be down to 2%, the whole research program may be at 7 or 8%. And so it does impact the overall. So we're not silos anymore. It's one overall research program. The research offices need to determine how additional fundings will impact carryover. And then review your start dates to ensure that execution can occur. Don't accept funding until the investigator is on board or has an onboard date. We've heard stories where investigators, projects have not started because the investigator is still not on board, but it's 6 months later or 3 months later, and that investigator has not been onboarded. And so obviously that's going to delay your start dates. And again, talk to your service program managers. They understand this and they'll be willing to help you. So this additional reporting that's going to start soon will happen over the next probably 3 months, 2 to 3 months. RAPT has always been utilized by the field as an informational tool. We're able to get ITAs, TDAs, pink sheets, and so forth. However, this year there's going to be an additional field that's going to go from the field back to central office, which is a cumulative expense field within the fiscal year. So this will be kind of a lump sum per project over the year as you're expending. And it's going to help at least ORD understand where things are with expenditures in the project and so forth, your execution rate. And they can roll that up and look at it in terms of where all your expenditures are compared to what's showing in FMS. So the research offices will be the point of contact for these discussions. So centers, please make sure you're talking to the research offices about this. So I can't stress enough about, the Dunlow notifications, prior year budget management, current year management, preparing for the end of the year. Contracting is a big thing. We all know the delays in contracting. However, the special group that's assigned to research has done a great job in trying to get contracts through and process. Interagency agreements, dumping money at the end of the year doesn't help. So we need to plan out the interagency agreements a little bit better. So these are all critical, and we will become much more so as we move to IFAMs. Excuse me. As we move to IFAMs in the next few years. So Mr. Dunlow does have an ORD budget mail group. If you're a budget analyst or an AO or technician that want to be added to that group, please email him and he'll add you. And don't be afraid to ask questions. I think that's one of the things that over the years I've learned is that the AOs in ORD and the budget analysts in ORD are very willing to answer questions. It's better to ask the question. I think the forgiveness issue is no longer there. We just need to be upfront with things and be much more transparent about the way we do business. So today's and next week's presentation. Today we're going to talk about general information regarding the research appropriation and the impact of the research appropriation and other appropriations to research. Next week we're going to focus on 3 major areas. Actually, we're going to really look at 2 major areas and possibly have a third seminar on reimbursables. So we're going to look at allocations and expenditures. We're going to talk about tools that you can use to manage and where to get these tools and where to get information. We'll touch a little bit on WinRMS, but we're looking at a more in-depth training into how to use RMS. I know that the RDCC does WinRMS training, but that's really more how to set it up. This is really going to focus on tricks of the trade and how to use it and how to move forward with it. I've been to several sites over the last few years and really have come out with the basics of RMS, but we really need to focus more on how to use it more in depth. So I'm going to turn it over to the presentation to Mr. Dunlow, the Director of Finance for ORD. We all know Alan. We know his messages and so forth. And so, Mr. Dunlow, I'm turning this over to you.
All right. Thanks, Tony. As I go through the next couple slides, some of you folks have seen some of these slides. They've been updated, but some of the basics don't change as we do our business. So I kind of want to reiterate some of those, but also want you all to kind of get an understanding of how I see things at this level, and then kind of put yourself in the shoes of, okay, how and what I doing can I support the national level? A few things before I go on. I think we tried to build these slides you'll see today and next week kind of as a reference deck. So hopefully you can keep these and kind of refer back to them with some questions. And the key as we move forward is open communication. So as Tony said, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to elevate something. I may not have the answer, but please communicate with us. And the other thing, I just want to make sure people don't misunderstand. We're going to be reviewing and asking you to return money. That doesn't mean it's money you lost. It just means we need to adjust the life cycle of the merit, but we need to get better executing the money we have. So Tony's on my next slide already. My expectations of the field. Above all else in our business, I need honesty with what we're doing. Bad news, of course, doesn't get better with age. I'll try to always be honest with you, and I kind of expect the same thing in return. I don't expect you to be attorneys, but I'll go over some basic fiscal law terms that I do expect you to know. The FDS5, this purpose, time, and amount. You just keep that in the forefront of what you're doing, and for the most part, you'll stay out of hot water as far as fiscal law is concerned. You'll hear this over and over as we go forward. Return money in a timely manner. If you return money to me on September 30th, it doesn't do me any good. I can't spend it, so it'll be carryover either way. So we'll be working a lot to try to identify money that can be returned so we can do something with it at this level. And those Dunlow updates that Tony's called them, I just want you to know that oftentimes I do include your VISN CFOs on those updates for their information to solicit their support. I don't really dialogue with your individual CFOs, but I do include the VISN CFOs so they know what I'm telling you and can hopefully support me in managing the research portfolio. I want you never to forget that I don't forget that you guys have to execute these great plans that we have. It's relatively easy to sit up here, and when I was in the military we called it the ivory tower, but in the ivory tower and make these great plans and projections and ideas, but I do realize that you guys are where the rubber meets the road, and you have to execute these, and I do understand the challenges, and we'll help you get through those as best we can, but I do understand what you're going through. Our performance measures. At the national level, I have to create an operations plan. Oftentimes I have to build that plan before I even know what the final number is. But every month I'm measured against that plan, and I'll show you that plan in a later slide on how it's put together. But understand that whenever I deviate from that plan more than 5%, I have to provide a reason of why I'm not on that plan. I build that plan based on historical execution of our portfolio. Again, I don't know what contracts you have working at any particular time, but I need to project in this plan what contracts will obligate per month throughout the year. So I use historical numbers to build that plan, and you'll see that. As far as carryover, when we build the president's budget, one of the things I have to include is an estimated carryover of our money into the second year. And there's no scientific formula for me to estimate that. It's just, I guess, more of an art to try to estimate that. But my goal has been at this level to establish a carryover of $50 million per year. Of late, we've fallen significantly off that mark, and I'll talk you through a slide in a few minutes on our goal to get to that $50 million. Again, your metric for carryover is no more than 4%. That I look at that is total money on station, not 4% per merit, not 4% per center. It is 4% of the total money that you have on station, and it includes all those different fundings. The other metric that we have to measure now, or it's measured against us, is what's called prior recoveries. That's basically when you deobligate a contract or an action the following year, and the money is again available. We actually have to get permission to respend that money, so that's why it's important that we track that, and it's important that you try to make the best estimates you can when you initiate a contract or buy a service. And it's critical that you try to be timely in deobligating those funds so that hopefully you can use them again that year, but then minimize the prior year carryover. And again, you may, as we go through these slides and the training sessions, you may hear some things that are redundant. If I was on a stage, I might be stomping my feet that, this is testable, so write this down. We provide money to you on an annual basis with the expectation that that money will be spent that fiscal year. It is a 2-year appropriation, as we've talked about, but we get it every year, and we fund your merits and your centers and your facilities on an annual basis with what we think will be spent in those 12 months. Contracts. Again, when I show you the plan, you'll see how our execution increases in August and September. I encourage you, as best you can, to realign your contracts so they're all not having to be renegotiated on September or in October. September, it's the end of the fiscal year, potential that it won't happen. October, it's the start of the year. We're usually under CR, usually have limited funding. So it'd be nice, not much for me, but for you to maybe get your contracts on a March to March or February to February, something that's not always coming due at the end of the fiscal year. Interagency agreements. Reimbursables and agreements are a challenge for us. FSC has put out new guidance in the last couple of years. Make sure that your station is following that guidance if you're involved with interagency agreements. Critical. We have different appropriations of money. You cannot mix the appropriations. Just because you run out of research dollars doesn't mean you can all of a sudden buy something that's appropriately funded with the medical service appropriation. Most of you only get research. Some of you get some specific purpose dollars. You can't mix those. They're sent to you. You must keep them separate. They serve a different purpose. And a violation of that would violate one of those purpose, time, and amounts principles. Tony talked about the WinRMS, a great fiscal tool. Those of you who aren't using it, I encourage you to talk with a station that has used it to see how you might benefit from transitioning to that tool also. Next slide. These are things you don't really need to focus on these, except we get an appropriation. You can read the Congress.gov We get an appropriation, which gives us our money. OMB, there's some budget authority of what we can spend. You obligate the dollars, and then it results in an outlay. Kind of like you write the check's cash, and the dollars change hands, that's the outlay. Commitment accounting is coming in IFAMs. Right now, when I ask you guys, you haven't obligated these dollars, so I'm taking them back. I would bet a paycheck that the first answer I get back from all of you is, but I've committed it. I have set it aside for this purpose. I don't see that. When you send an item to contracting and it's committed for a contract, until it's awarded and obligated, I don't really know that. But in the new system, I'm told that there will be commitment accounting. So at the national level, we will have better visibility of what you have in the hopper and what's working prior to obligation. But again, when Congress and OMB is looking at our execution, they're really not looking at commitments. They look at, this is what you got, and this is the money that's obligated or cleared the bank. And if you haven't done that, then it might be right for taking. Next slide. These are the basic definitions that I just want you to hone in on. Only thing you hear me sometimes say, PTA, purpose, time, and amount. Congress gives us money for a specific purpose to do research for a specific time, 2 years, for a specific amount. This year it's $815 million. We can only buy with those dollars what Congress intended to do, which is research. So you just need kind of, as far as just remember those three key elements: purpose, time, and amount. We're about the limit. Sometimes Congress puts in their additional language of what you can't exceed. Don't really worry about that. Just remember the purpose, time, and amount as far as your fiscal law training. Next slide. At this level, working with OMB, you may know this, but at any point in time, I am working with different years of money. Right now, for example, we are working the FY 22-23 President's budget. Normally, that budget would have already been submitted to Congress by the first or second Monday in February. Of course, we're delayed with that this year, but so we will be having that submitted to Congress. Our current year is our FY 21-22, so those are the dollars that were passed on 31 December for this year. We have our prior year money, which is our FY 2021, so those dollars are in their second year of their 2-year life cycle. Those dollars that we did not spend last year are what's in our carryover for this year. Many of you have some medical service appropriation dollars that we send you. We kind of lump those as 870 funds. Those are the query, the cooperative studies. There's some genomics. Some of you get some lease money. One station gets some 0152. Those are our medical services appropriate dollars, and those are the 1-year dollars. None of these, however, and I'll point this out later, they do not include the VEER medical research support dollars. Just for planning purposes, as you know, the 1 year impacts the next as we defend our budget. Case in point, we carried over $131 million of direct money of FY 2021 into 21-22. A logical question is, why do we need to give you so much if you carried over so much money this next year? So the carryover and our execution does impact our discussions when we're seeking more money. there's one key point down there that's highlighted in yellow, and you guys probably know this. 100 good attaboys are wiped away with one all shucks. We can be as efficient and work as effectively as we can, but one identified waste on the front page of the Washington Post or kind of negates all those great things. So we've got to be careful and be efficient and effective with the dollars that we have. Next slide. Again, I just wanted to paint you a picture of the dynamics at this level. Sometimes you probably think we're a little schizophrenic because we don't know what our number is, or we're not planning effectively. For FY21, as an example, the President's budget asked for $787 million. During the budget cycle, the number that Congress was talking about was up as high as $840 million. When it was finally passed, they settled on $815 million. Out of the blue, which wasn't on my radar screen, was another rescission of $20 million against our prior year money. Most times when Congress does rescissions, they give with one hand and take away the other in the same year. What's made it kind of challenging for us is they have taken the money back in our prior year when most of that money was already distributed. Case in point, this year, when we were given the rescission, I only had $1 million here at the national level. All the other money was distributed to you guys. I had to pull back $19 million from you guys out in the field. So I just want to, and for example, for this year, I can't speak to the number, but for FY22, we have asked for a significant increase. Discussions over the last 3 or 4 weeks with OMB have hinted that number for 22 could be significantly higher. And then depending on when they pass the appropriation in 22, we could be back in the same boat of lots of money coming in at the last minute that we need to spend to prevent carryover. Next slide. Some of you guys, I presented this to several different forums, and people seem to kind of like this quick snapshot of our world. So let me just run through these. Very good. These elements and how I scored them. Last year, we only lapsed $3,336 out of $752 million. That's a good story. You guys can get your calculators out and figure out the 0.0001% of dollars that we actually lapse. I always try to point to that when people say you're not executing your money. And I kind of say, well, look at after 2 years, look what we did. But they don't really want to hear that. We carried over $158 million when you add everything up. That's a very bad story. And that ended up costing us $20 million in the rescission. Though nobody will really say that's why we got the rescission, that's what we believe. This past year, we were under 5 continuing resolutions. 1 or 2 of those were passed for 1 or 2 days at a time. That's difficult for us in getting the ITA money out because we're left sending out, in some cases, $10 or $20 when you break it down, break the merit down with 1 or 2 day funding. We didn't get the full amount out until 27 January 2021. Again, when these slides, ITA was just 100% distributed. It's a poor business when you can't get your money out until end of the 4th month of the year. It's difficult for you guys, where the rubber meets the road, to now execute that 12 months of funding with your 8 months that you have left. Artist reporting seemed to go pretty good this year. People have adapted to the new guidance and the new process. 20 million rescission caused extensive work. That was difficult. It muddies the water of us going forward as we ask for more money, and that makes a very difficult story. At the time this slide was prepared, 100% use of the new reimbursable funds, that was a good story. However, last week, somebody out there, I don't know who yet, collected $69,000 into the A fund, which cannot occur. Remember, do not use the A fund for any of your reimbursable activity. Next slide. Let me pick it up here a little bit. This is just to kind of paint a picture of all the appropriations that are in play. You'll see down there, medical research, that's our 0161A1. We have 0161R1, 0161R1 current year. We have the 0161X2, that's the reimbursables from the nonprofit. And we have the 0161A5, that's the 5-year money that most of you don't have to worry about. But all those are part of that research appropriation. The big circle at the top is all the medical services dollars, the 0160, 0152. That's where the VERA money for VERA research support comes from. We don't manage it. We don't control it. It's just used in the formula to get general purpose dollars to your facility. You, as a research office, you earn that for the facility, but it goes to the director's big pot for him to manage the entire facility. Also, out of that medical services circle, that's where our query money comes from, the lease money that a couple of you get. And then off to the side, you see the IT, which we don't control. Major construction, minor construction, we don't control, but those are all appropriations at VA that support or our research effort in some way. So hopefully that gives you a picture of all the different appropriations in play, and you do not mix those appropriations. Next slide. This is the op plan that I talk about. This is the FY20 plan, and the red line that you see is the dotted line is the plan. The solid red line is the actual execution, and the top line is the FTE count, the plan, and the execution. You'll see an anomaly that happened in February, the big dip in the FTE and a slight dip in the obligations. Basically, that was one event that happened at FSC where they they failed to put the payroll accrual on the books for that period of time. That artificially deflated the February execution numbers, which were brought back and on plan in March. So if you look at this plan, you see we basically did very well sticking to plan until that fourth quarter. Fourth quarter, even our plan realizes there's a big uptick in execution in September and August, primarily due to the contracts. It's a little challenging with the FTE because some of you do your expense transfers at the last minute. So payroll actually goes down, contracts actually go up. But this past year, we fell off the plan quite a bit in those last 2 months of the year. Up above, you'll see the BOCs, the budget object codes that I have to build a plan to. I have to estimate payroll by month, supplies by month, equipment by month, to submit that to the department, and then report that on a monthly basis. Again, just for your information on how we have to monitor the research execution at this level. Next slide. I wanted to just talk about this a little bit. This is our carryover trend. On the right-hand side, you'll see the part about lapsed dollars, where I think we've done pretty good. I'd like to take credit. If you'll notice on the lapsed dollar side, I came to ORD around FY13, and after that, you see great improvement on the lapsed dollar side as we've managed that portfolio. On the dollars carried over, you'll see that we're making progress to that $50 million target until FY17 and 18, and then that slope reversed. some of the things that are impacting on that, you'll see what made up that total carryover. You have our X-year money. That is the money you get from the nonprofits for reimbursement for the nonprofits. It is not intended to be a slush fund. You guys need to execute those dollars and get those dollars going back down. 5-year dollars. We were given a special pot of money in FY 18-19 of 5-year money. Even though it's 5-year money, it was held, I'll use the term, against us in the sense that we didn't obligate it the first year or two because it contributed to my carryover. Understand that the rescission, when they hit us for the rescission, they don't take some from the 5-year and some from the X year. It all came from our direct pot in the middle. So we need to focus on reducing our carryover in hopes of not having another rescission. So on the 5-year dollars, we're trying to get that spent. On the X year, you should be looking at that to see what expense transfers you can make now to lower those the accounts in your X2 fund control points. And then if you identify money after you do those expense transfers, maybe you can return that to central office post haste so that we can reinvest those dollars. So that's a picture for you that everything counts in our carryover. Next slide. The bottom line on this, what's the impact of rescission? It's basically it's $70 million over the last 2 years of lost buying power. The first year, when we did the $50 million, I was able to make you whole because I replaced it with current year money. This year, when we took back the $20 million, we did not send you current year money to replace what we took back. And some of you, that was very painful. Some of you didn't really have much reaction when we had to take back some dollars. Regardless, it's a significant disruption to our operations and trying to provide a stable business environment. So we really can't afford to lose that much buying power in our portfolio when I have so many unfunded requirements on the table right now. I really need your help to focus on spending your money to reduce the carryover, so hopefully we do not have another rescission. Next slide. Again, I need you to help me educate the investigators that though it is by law 2-year money, we only send you money 1 year at a time based on your budget with the expectation that you spend it that year. Don't worry that Dunlow has 2-year money and he's managing that at that level. What we send you is 1 year's worth of money and expect it to be spent. And it's a challenge for you because when I look at what you have on station, I'm not looking at the individual merits. You know, Investigator X hasn't spent any of his money, so he's still got $100,000. Investigator Y, he spent his money, so he's at zero. I don't see that. I just see that in aggregate, you still have $100,000 that is above your 4%. So work with your investigators, educate your investigators to spend their money. If it's not going to be spent, work aggressively to submit project modification orders early so that the program managers can adjust the time period of the merit and that we can pull back money and reallocate it at the end of the merit. Next slide. Just some issues have come up lately on the General Post Fund, and we're going to need to try to work to come up with some guidance for you guys. I encourage you, when you have donations, people that want to donate money to the facility for research, use the nonprofit. try to steer them away from the general post fund. It's a little more workable if you use the nonprofit than the limitation of the general post fund. The general post fund is not to capture reimbursements. When you get a reimbursement, you've got the 0161 R1 or the X2, depending on where it's coming from. The general post fund is not for your reimbursements. Again, if you don't know if you have money in the general post fund at your station, ask your fiscal office. Tony ran a report for me yesterday, and amongst all of you, there's about $14 million in the general post fund that we could be potentially using for our research. Next slide. I'll now turn the mic over to Kari with her words of wisdom.
Thank you, Alan. So I'm going to talk to you more specifically about the research office and the roles and responsibilities when running a research program in terms of the budget. As Tony mentioned, is the research office that has the ultimate responsibility for the overall budget at your facility. They need to have an understanding of all the programs in ORD, biomedical, clinical, rehab, your HSR&D, and how to manage the funds within each of those programs. And it's really important to establish those lines of communication with your program officers, your service directors, and being transparent with the different service lines on how you're doing in your expenditures for the year. As we've discussed, if you have an investigator that is not sending their funds, it looks like they're going to have a huge carryover, tackle that early. Reach out to the program officer, the service line, and see about submitting a PMO and having those reallocated. If you have a center or multiple centers, you need to be working with those administrators to ensure that they are in target for spending for the year, that they are not going to impact your carryover in a negative way, and that their spending, like I said, is on track. Your budget analyst in your research office is a critical asset for you. They can provide you updates on how you're doing in your fund control points, how your overall program is looking. And then, if there's an investigator that's overspending, underspending, working with them to get that back on track. Alan talked a lot about the problems with operating under the continuing resolution. Us in the field know how great it is when you get those pieces of funding and wait 4 months to get all the funding on station, and the complications that arise to process those and ensure that you're spending within your operational budget during the continuing resolution. If you have special purpose funds in the 0160, your medical center appropriation, and you have personnel that are crossing the programs or maybe working on a research program, then they're working on a medical care appropriated project, making sure that you are properly expensing those accounts and doing the cost transfers throughout the year, and understanding how when you do those cost transfers and you're working on different appropriations, how it's going to impact your research appropriated funds. And so that kind of is where it gets complicated when you have personnel that are spread across different programs or even different appropriations and managing that piece. Next slide, please. Your CC 101 funds. So the majority of your research appropriated funds come at the project merit level, but your CC 101 funds are those funds that are given to really manage your support of the research dollars. So they could be used for salary, equipment, education, travel, or any other type of broad research support that's not specific to a research project. The CC 101 funds are distributed based on the amount of VA-funded research at your specific VA. They determine your CC 101 funds. I'll show the calculation on the next slide, but it's based on your last 3 years of executed obligations. So that's another example why spending your funds is really important. They're looking at your obligations for the past 3 years to determine the amount of support you're going to get in your CC 101. In FY20, they changed the formula to add in a baseline of $150,000 for the CC 101 support, and that was done to better support your small and medium-sized programs. And here's the calculation. So as you can see, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but the more research funding that you receive, VA appropriated research funds, the more CC 101 funds that you will receive. The RDIS report. So the RDIS report you'll hear a lot about as you get closer to the end of a fiscal year. That information is pulled from ePromise, and ePromise manages all your VA-funded, non-VA funded, and non-funded research projects that are approved by your Research and Development Committee. So basically, any project that your R&D committee approves, it needs to be entered into ePromise. For best practice, you should not wait until the end of the fiscal year and do that mad rush to make sure all your projects are in the system. You should be doing that throughout the year. Best practice for us is you have the R&D committee, the minutes are written up, take those minutes, get it into ePromise on a monthly basis. And so by doing that, at the end of the year, when you go to your RDIS annual report, you'll be entering in the confirmed allocations for all your VA-funded projects and either the expenditures or the allocation using the notice of award for all your non-VA funded projects. And next slide, please. And the reason why it's important to enter these allocations and expenditures in the RDIS accurately is that it is used to determine what your VERA funds are going to be for your medical center. And the VERA dollars are allocated annually to the medical center. As Ellen said, it's 0160 funds, not research funds that they receive, and it's used for their operational support. To determine each VA share, there's a formula that's done based on your allocations and expenditures you provide in the RDS report, and then each year, based on the budget allowed, it's determined what your VA share will be. At deadlines, we've talked about those Dunlow notices. They are very important throughout the year. We also need to look at those for the deadlines. Deadlines may also come from your fiscal or contracting office, and you need to be paying attention to those and communicating those to the individuals that it impacts. For example, if your credit card transactions are going to be shut down toward the end of the year as reconciliations are taking place and your VISTA menus are shut down by fiscal, you need to be letting your PIs know that, your lab personnel, the people that are spending funds, so that they can plan ahead. Same thing with your 1358, 2237 transactions. When does your fiscal office start closing down those options for the end of the year so that you can get those in time? Contract deadlines, you need to pay attention to the pulp tables. Make sure that you're getting your equipment and your service requests in on time, and making sure that your PIs also know those deadlines, so they're not coming to you with equipment order in July and finding out it's too late to get that order through contracting. Reimbursements, you'll hear from Alan at the end of the fiscal year that you don't want to pull in funds at that time in September where it will just get lost if you try to do a collection. Prior year, every year, it's March 31st is the deadline, and that, I think we need to do a better job at the field is paying attention to that March 31st, getting our prior year dollars cleared out, and focusing on spending our current year funds at that point. And then cost transfers and IAs, there's deadlines for those as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about cost transfers later on. Right here. So cost transfers, as we talked about, it's important to do cost transfers throughout the fiscal year. There are some facilities that have gotten into a habit of doing them all at the end of the year in September. And talking to some sites, it sounds like their fiscal office may encourage it that way, but we really need to move away from doing cost transfers in one lump group in September. These should be done throughout the fiscal year. And one of those reasons is that chart that Alan showed that he's, trying to plan his execution. It's really hard to do projections throughout the year if all of a sudden in September there's a huge change in your salary costs because you just executed a whole bunch of cost transfers. As I mentioned, prior years need to be expended by March 31st. You shouldn't wait to the end of the year to close out your prior year funds. Again, those cost transfers should be occurring. Right now you should be working on those. Cost transfers may not just be between prior year and current year funds. They may be between, if you have those special purpose projects, you may be transferring them between the medical center And the research appropriations, you may be transferring them with the reimbursables, your R1, X2 funds to clear those out, 870 funds, or you may have people that work on both, let's say a clinical project and an HSR&D project, so you need to transfer amongst the programs to make sure those costs are allocated appropriately. And again, these all should be completed throughout the year. Your fiscal office. Your fiscal office is going to be a very, very important resource for you, and communication with them is key. You need to be working to establish a relationship with them, whether it be monthly meetings or routine communication, because they're going to be your resource for so many tasks that you have to do. You know, they're the ones that are going to be obligating your transactions, providing you with the status of allowance, helping you. You know, if I have a fund control point off one morning and I can't figure it out, and I've looked at the status allowance, I've looked at my daily reports, the running balance, and email the fiscal, and I usually find out, you know, what's going on, and they can help me with that. They'll process your TDAs for you into the appropriate fund control points. They'll move your ceilings. If you need more money in salary than all other, they can make those moves. They're going to do your cost transfer request and your billing request. So it's really important that they know what's going on and that you're meeting with them and communicating with them on your needs. Research is always a little bit of unique, so it definitely takes that working together to get those things done. Next, the other office is your nonprofit. If you have a nonprofit, again, it's important to establish a relationship with them and lines of communication as you're going to work together on a lot of requirements for the year, whether or not it's your, you know, an IAA, or when you're working on the RDAS report, you're going to need their expenditure information. You may have MOUs, IPAs, and then you may be billing the nonprofit if you're providing services for them that you need to be reimbursed for. And I'll talk a little bit more about billing on this next slide. So your nonprofit corporations and universities, bills of collections need to occur when you're providing these services with a research appropriated dollars, and you need to be reimbursed for those costs. So one example would be animal per diems. If you're housing their animals, you need to be reimbursed for those costs of the animals. Salary costs. If you have an individual that's a VA salaried employee and working for them on a project, we need to be billing for their salary. And core services is another example. If they're using a piece of our equipment that has fees associated with it. To initiate the bill of collection, you need to have the billing menu in Vista. They need to be vendorized, and you really need to pay attention to how you're entering the bill. If it's the nonprofit, you're going to bill the 0161X2 fund, and the university bill will go to the R1 fund. And it's really important to make sure that you're billing the correct fund when you initiate those. And as Ellen's talked about, the X2 funds do not expire, but they do count toward your carryover. There's a reason why you got those X2 funds. There was a cost that was incurred by your research appropriated dollars, and you got reimbursed for it. You need to finish that transaction. You need to do that cost transfer and get those funds back to that fund control point for those costs that were incurred. You should not be letting those funds build up. They need to be put back into the research appropriated. Communication with PIs. So PIs, you know, we've heard from different PIs that they're not getting their financial information, and we really need to make sure that that changes. It's key to ensuring that their projects are expended appropriately, and now that we're really focusing on these dollars being one-year dollars within the fiscal year. So my advice, the best practices would be to meet with each PI at the beginning of a fiscal year, go over their funds allocations, look at their ping sheet, what are they going to get this year, and develop a spend plan right then. You know, look at how we're going to spend your funds throughout the fiscal year. They should be receiving monthly account statements from you, and that information, when you send out those statements, talk to them about how they're doing. Are they on target for the year to spend all their funds? Does it look like they're overspending, underspending? Are there adjustments that need to be made to their spending habits to correct that? And then you should be routinely reviewing each PI account throughout the year. Right now, look at your account statements. Is there a PI that has a large amount of funds available? Well, let's reach out to them. Maybe there's a reason for that, and we need to contact ORD and do a PMO and have those funds reallocated. And like I mentioned earlier with the deadlines, ensure they know those deadlines. Let them know, hey, equipment orders are due this date. If you're going to do a service contract, we need to know by then. Credit card spending is going to be cut off for the end of the year on this date. And just really stress with guys that the VA does not allow for carryover. Especially if you have a new investigator, they may not be used to that. They might be used to, non-VA funds, bigger carryovers. It's really important to make sure they know that up front at the beginning of their funding period that, hey, the VA doesn't allow carryover. You need to spend all your funds this year. And just really hold them accountable for spending. We talked about returning funds to ORD. You need to work with your investigator and the program officer, submit those PMOs if it looks like they're not going to execute the funding. And it's important to get ahead of that early so that you're not going to end up with a large carryover amount. And we're really going to start looking at this closer by ORD is in Q3 this year. But prior to returning funds to ORD, really make sure though that all expenditures have been received for that project. Are there going to be any outstanding charges? And if you're returning funds because investigators retire and are leaving the VA, just always factor in that there's going to be that annual leave payout before you return the funds. Next slide. Okay, some tools of the trade. I'll talk about WinRMS on the next slide. The rest of these we're going to go through in detail in the next section next week. But the VSSC, the fiscal report, that's a great tool to find your status of allowance, which you can also obtain from the fiscal office. You can use that to balance your fund control points to FMS and make sure that you have all your expenditures aligned. Your F20 daily activity reports, I use that all the time. If for some reason I'm out of balance in the morning, and I was on balance yesterday, pull up the daily activity report. What hit those fund control points overnight? What adjustments do I need to make? The open obligation report is really important to stay on top of. As Alan talked about going back prior years, if you have those open obligations, you want to make sure that if you're going to be deobligating funds or not using them, that you tackle that before those funds expire and they're not lost to your facility. So if you have prior year dollar obligations right now, you should be looking at those, making sure that you're going to be invoiced for the full amount. If you're going to deobligate, plan ahead for that so you can spend the funds before they expire. The AACS reports where you're going to find your TDAs and VERA information. Vista you can use for a lot, but that'll have your running balance and expenditures. And it's really important to make sure that you have the appropriate menus and keys that you need, and you can talk to your fiscal office about what you need to get access. And then the RACS report where you can find your investigator pink sheets and your funding reports for the year. And then my favorite program, I get really, really excited talking about WinRMS. I know the majority of you, based on the poll, do not have this program, and I really highly encourage you using it. I use it every day. It's a lifesaver. What it does is it interfaces with Vista and downloads in all your accounting information that has occurred since your last download. So it's going to download your salary information for personnel, your contracts, your credit card purchases, your cost transfers. All your transactions download into the program. And the great thing about it is you can set up sub-control points in Vista, and they can actually download directly into an investigator's account. So at any point on any day, an investigator can email you, ask you for account statement, and within a few clicks of a button, you can give them a detailed PDF that tells them exactly where they're at. It also projects out the salary costs for VA employees for the year, so you can plan ahead on what that's going to cost you. It helps you identify accounting errors in your research project budgets. So if an employee is not paid correctly or there's a charge that's not correct, WinRMS is going to help you identify that. And then you can work with your fiscal office to correct those transactions. It is incredibly cumbersome to set up. I will admit that, it's challenging to get it going, but once you do, it is a huge asset to your accounting staff. I have multiple members in my research office that use it, and it can run expense reports. Like I said, you can provide reports to your investigator at a moment's notice and let them know where it's at. So if you don't have WinRMS or you have it and you're not using it and you want to learn more about it, reach out to Tony and we would be happy to help you install it at your facility. And then I'll send it back to Tony for the summary.
Sometimes you got to figure out how to unmute the microphone. So thanks, Alan, and thanks, Kari. I can't say enough about WinRMS. It is, as Kari said, cumbersome to start up, but once you get going, just like anything else, if you take care of it daily, it really becomes part of the routine, and it really does help you out. So I want to summarize, because I think that we provide you some tools. Next week, we're really going to get into those tools and how to access those tools and utilize them to better manage your budgets. I can't say enough about communication, not just with the centers and PIs, but with ORD. Times have changed. This is it's a new year, it's a new challenge, and we really need to step up and help Dr. Ramoni and Mr. Dunlow in managing the budgets appropriately and really spending down so we can work through. You need to build relationships with budget and accounting. We do know that there are some facilities that have had some problems there, but I think that the CFOs of the facilities are responsible for the budgets and for accounting, just like you are. ORD will hold you responsible. VHA Finance will hold the fiscal officers responsible. So it's got to be a team effort to make this work. You've got to stay on top of the budget. It can easily get away from you. We've seen it. We've seen it happen where, all of a sudden the fiscal year's over and you have a lot of money, or you don't have enough money, or, it's 2 years later and an investigator comes and says, hey, what happened to my $50,000 from 2 years ago? It's really critical that we get there. Ask questions. Ask questions. Ask questions. Mr. Dunlow's there. We're there. We're gonna work on setting up kind of a help desk for budget issues. We're going to take budget analysts and AOs from across the nation. We're going to ask them to help, respond to questions and so forth. That will be coming up in the next 6 months. So hopefully we can get that established for next fiscal year. Now, I will tell you that Kari and I specifically understand that there are issues with hiring people. There are issues with bringing people on board. We know that. But it's also incumbent on you to figure out when there is a problem that, you just can't hold on to the money. You gotta work with the services and the program offices to send that money back, to do PMOs, to say, listen, I can't hire this person, to start the project for 6 months. We're going to have to kind of rework the budget, and so really work with them and communicate. So I think we're going to stop now, and I'm going to open it up. We really want to answer questions now. If we don't get to questions, we're going to answer them. If we put them out in the chat box and we run out of time, we'll still answer them. So we'll get to the point where we'll write you through. So I'm going to send us back to Kate and go from there.
Okay, great. I'm just going to take one moment to share my screen.
Do I need to stop sharing? No. Okay.
Oh, no, I have it.
Okay.
All right.
Looks like some of the questions are coming in the chat box also.
Yeah.
All right, so here's our first question. Could everyone see that?
Yeah. I typed a response into to that answer, and just so you know that a couple years ago, OMB apportions most of the money for the government on a quarterly basis. Kind of like you get your 2-week paycheck, that you can't spend it until you get that 2-week paycheck. A couple years ago, we were able to change our category of how we get our money. I think it's called Category B, which meant that OMB basically gave us our full year apportionment up front. That worked great the first year it happened because we were able to send out the ITA 100% funded. However, when there's a CR, it kind of negates that benefit because we're only given so much money at a time. So that is, we have tried to address that and make all attempts to get as much money out early as possible. The other thing going forward that we are probably going to try to look at with OMB is maybe even getting the research appropriation considered or get it an advanced appropriation. The rest of the VHA has an advanced appropriation. For example, the medical services, they already know their number for FY22 because they have an advanced appropriation. If we could get research into that same scenario, we would know our number for FY22 already, and it would help us with our distribution, getting the money out early, and maybe address some of the challenges we have of late dollars going out.
So I think I'm going to take the next question, which is the field can provide plenty of feedback in the proper form. Yes, no question about it. I think there's been many forums over the last 2 or 3 years that have brought up issues and struggles. I think contracting was one. I think IT was another one, and HR has been the constant. I think the point to take home here is that we all understand that HR is a struggle. Some VISNs are doing a much better job of transitioning to the new VHA mandates that the VISNs be the HR points and so forth. Some VISNs are struggling with it. And it has taken, for example, in my VISN, a year for us to understand this and to really work through. However, I do see the light at the end of that tunnel. However, I think what we're trying to tell you is if you're having these struggles, you've got to talk to the program officers, and you've got to sit down and reallocate your funding, because it does nobody any good for you to carry that money over when you're not going to be able to use it. And then you can work with the program officers to submit a PMO, which is, by the way, a project modification form that was built a few years back to really work through project changes, administrative changes, PI changes, redistribution of funds. And I think that the ORD services are talking as well about, how to send the money out. Do you need the whole project 1 year budget right away? Do you want to look at it and maybe reallocate and so forth? So from the ORD perspective, I think they're looking at things from the research office perspective. We gotta understand that these are problems and there are major obstacles. And what we don't want to do is have a PI lose out on the money. So let's redistribute it after we hire, knowing when we hire somebody.
And let me just kind of add to answer kind of another concern that was in the chat box. It is not the intent of ORD or Dr. Ramoni to take money from an investigator and reduce his overall merit. On those PMOs, the intent hopefully would be to add 6 months or whatever at the end of the merit with funding because it got a late start or didn't execute or hire somebody the first 6 months. So, and that's going to be an education process to convince investigators that they're not going to lose their money, that it's going to be added to the end of their merit if those situations occur.
Yeah, and I think that the nice part is that the PMO is a formal document that's signed off by everybody. And so if you have a budget redistribution and it's in that, there's a spreadsheet in there, and that's signed off by the PI, the ACOS, and the service director at the ORD level, then I never say the word guaranteed, but at least there is a document that you can fall back on to tell your investigators, look, we're sending money back, but you're going to get it in FY25 or FY24 or whatever, that kind of thing. So I think that PMO process does work very well, and it does document, because once they do the PMO, they update your pink sheet in RAFT, and so that's the other piece that helps out. do we have another question there?
Oh, yes, we have a lot of questions.
Yeah, I think we answered that one. What do you think, Alan?
Yeah, I'll just add to that Dr. Ramoni is doing everything she can to address the HR issue. Matter of fact, she has a meeting tomorrow afternoon with the head of workforce management to see if there's some type of research cell that could be stood up. So all I can say is the HR issue is understood, and Dr. Ramoni is doing what she can to address that.
Yeah, I do think that one additional point here is that that the VISNs should be communicating with the medical centers on their process changes, and I think that once that started happening in VISN 7, it was understood of what the processes were going to be. Doesn't mean that the processes are perfect, but to understand that classification, CCU, and what the timelines are, because they are held to certain accountable standards of classifying PDs, as well as what the position managers do and so forth. So I think we're going to work towards doing some education in that piece as well. But again, it's working with your PI, and if you're having troubles hiring and so forth, it's kind of rethinking the PMO through the process. Okay, next one, Kate. Yeah, again, I think the PMO is really the document that will change things. And once you get that PMO approved, then the pink sheet changes. And then the pink sheet changes, there's your contract, in my mind. Another one, Kate. So COVID, yes. So this is a very big issue. And I think that we have talked about PMOs. We have talked about submitting PMOs. I think there's guidance on the ORD website about COVID-19 and the COVID-19 facts that talks about what to do in those situations. So absolutely, the PMOs are a big thing. I know that staff were paid during this. There is the issue of staff that are being pulled. Those should be reimbursed but through fiscal back to the research appropriation, which then impacts your carryover, by the way. And so you have to take those things into consideration. There are fiscal guidelines on people that are pulled from research into medical care to support COVID activities.
And this kind of falls in line with everything we've been talking about. If this occurred, there needs to be the PMO put in because the project was delayed. The money returned to ORD or the services in a timely manner so that we can reallocate it this year. I mean, all these actions that we're talking about don't work in isolation. They all, you push here and something else pops out. So, it's acknowledging that there was delay, acknowledging that there needs to be an adjustment to the merit or whatever, acknowledgement that there's money there that probably will not be spent, and then returning it in a timely manner.
Next one, Kate. So we'll talk about that next week, about the training on VSSC. Is there any research projects that would not be able to send back funds? Yes. My understanding is that you can always send back funds. It's getting an extension or a redistribution. And I think that if you talk to the services directly, and if you have a REAP or a center or a coin, definitely talk to the service program managers about that. Next one. Alan, you want to tackle that one?
Hey,
Go ahead.
Okay.
I was saying, can you read? There's a question in the box, but there are people on the phone. Can you read the question?
Oh, yes. Is there a plan to change RAP to provide more usual information for budget, specific to TDA categorization, AO, salary, and travel, all other salary and travel?
I assume that means provide more useful information. I don't know what usual information.
Yeah.
There's no change that I'm working on to change the presentation. I was thinking most of that salary breakdown, travel breakdown, all other breakdown is on the pink sheet budgets.
Correct.
So I would need to ask that you guys send us what it's not showing that you think would be more helpful so that we can potentially look at it.
Yeah, I think what they're saying is that on the statement on the comments of the TDA, sometimes you say salary for PI or, for all other funds. Now, I will tell you that you have a lot of discretion at the facility level to move money into all other salary or travel. So
yeah, and we actually, and I hope we didn't make it harder, we went the other way actually. This year or the year before, we don't have a separate travel mnemonic anymore. We send it out all under one mnemonic, and you can put it in however you have your fund control point set up based on the pink sheets, and the total number that we send out hopefully should balance to what's on the pink sheets.
Right. Next one. We know. Yes, HR, we understand. Next one. It shows what you, okay, so the question is, does WinRMS show updated amounts available in 1358 and 2237 as transactions within them are posted? Do you need to be able to view salary SCPs to have research salaries update RMS? So that's a great question, and basically WinRMS downloads the current obligated amounts. So if you have a purchase card and it changes, then it updates that purchase card amount. It does update the 1358. It does not tell you the amount available. You have to go into Vista for that. And then it does, you do not need to view the salary SCPs, but you need to be able to have access to them to download them, because the salary SCPs are not really viewable per se. So the salaries update because then they tie into paid. Kari, am I right in that?
Yes, sorry. You got away from me.
Yeah.
I was answering another question in the box quick.
Okay.
So.
Kari or Kate, you want to next one? We also have issues with contracting. Is there a way that we can show you in force, et cetera, that we have done? Actually, Alan, you want to address that one?
Actually, when you guys use the research contracting office, they have set up a SharePoint site for me that I have visibility of all the contracts that they are working on for you guys. If you do not use the research contracting office, I don't see that. I won't see that. So to a certain extent, if you use them, I do see that what is working, so I can get an idea of what you might have committed. But it still boils down to the obligations at the end of the day. But that is one source where I do see what contracts you might be working on if you use their office.
Katie, next question. We're going to provide some guidance on. So the question is, how do we move funds from GPF to NPC if the funds are so old that we no longer have what they were originally donated for on record? Great question. We're working on some guidance on this. So a lot of this happened in the 1990s, and so we're trying to pull that guidance out, and we'll hopefully get you an SOP in the near future. The hiring issues extended classification unit. Is that experienced by others? The position of administering a multi-million-dollar project was classified at entry level. Yes. So Dr. Cody has a work group that's looking at standardizing positions such as project manager, data analyst, research coordinator, and so forth. So once those positions are classified at the national level, then my understanding is that these positions will then have to be accepted by the local DU or the local classification units. And so hopefully this will be the entryway to addressing the general problem of underclassification or so forth. There is an AO who has extensive experience in classification and has actually taught us that it's all in the wording and it's all in how you put the duties and the tasks together and explain them. And so we're taking that knowledge forward to work with this group. So hopefully that will start addressing some of these inconsistencies of positions across the nation. So the question is, can you break down what to do with reimbursables for fiscal for dummies? Alan, you want to take care of that one, or you want me to?
I will try to, then you can correct me. Reimbursables are other people's money. You get direct money, that's the money that I send you that's VA appropriated. Reimbursables are money from NIH, DOD, from the nonprofit when you bill them. It's any other money that's not direct. When you get the reimbursable dollars, it's usually to reimburse you for an expense that you incurred on the direct side. So when that happens, you get the reimbursable, and then you do the expense transfer against those reimbursed dollars to spend them, which then kind of replenishes your direct side fund control point for that reimbursement.
Right. I think that the key issue here is that you got to move the money out of the R1 and the X2 back into the A1 appropriation through the expense transfer, or expense transfer from A1 to the R1 and X2. And if you stay on top of that, then you don't build up those numbers.
Mm-hmm. All right, and then this is our last question that we have time for.
Yeah, so thank you. So this was a request. So be judicious about your PMOs. I think that you really need to plan this out. This is the biggest year, the end of this year. And I think you need to plan this out as you sit down with your investigators and say, okay, we need this, so let's plan out for the following 3 years for the existing projects and so forth. It's not going to be helpful that we're, constantly, taking project X, project 1, and sending a PMO every year. That's just not going to help matters. So sit down, be judicious, plan, and work with the program officer. Make sure they are aware of why you're doing this, and so forth. So, yeah, please be judicious about this and work and communicate with the program officer. So, I really want to thank everybody. I hope this was helpful. I think this is the beginning of more communication about budget matters. I think that we're going to take some of the questions and some of the feedback and apply it to next week's session. Again, next week is on allocations and expenditures and what to do with those. And it's going to be pretty detailed. So we'll have 2 slide sets for next week. And we can go from there. Alan, you want final comments from your end?
No, I just want to kind of sum it up. We realize that half our challenge is educating all of you on what's going on or what to do. There's turnover out in the field, and when we can't have like face-to-face sessions and training sessions, part of our problem is the training. So this is a step forward in hoping to have some training like this, and maybe even in the future we can formalize these to some type of more of a quarterly type basis that can focus in on a specific topic of the day or of the time. But again, I encourage you to communicate, and ask questions. And I apologize. Someone said about using acronyms. We should have thought about that with a training session for new people, not to use so many acronyms. But I'm willing to talk to any of you one-on-one if we need to further facilitate the dialogue. But thanks for your participation.